All right, today we are diving into the life of one of the most unbelievable figures of the 20th century, Alexandra David-Néel. Now get this, she was an explorer, a spiritualist, a Buddhist scholar, an anarchist, an opera singer, and a writer. I mean, this was a woman who lived 100 lives in one and just shattered every single expectation along the way.
Her life is so packed you can't just put her in a simple box. And it really makes you ask a pretty fundamental question: what does it actually take to do something that everyone else says is impossible? You know, to go to the one place you are absolutely forbidden to go.
So I want you to picture this. The year is 1924. There's a French woman, 56 years old, trekking through the absolute brutal cold of a Himalayan winter. She's dealing with the threat of starvation, dodging bandits, and trying to stay clear of government patrols. And after walking over 1,000 miles, she actually does it. She walks right into Lhasa, the forbidden capital of Tibet, a city that was completely sealed off to all foreigners. She was the very first Western woman to ever pull this off. So the question is, who was this person, and how on earth did she do it?
To even begin to understand how someone could attempt a journey like that, we've got to go back, way back. We have to look at the making of a true rebel.
Alexandra's entire life was basically one of constant defiance. At 15, she runs away from home. By 18, she's in London, diving headfirst into esoteric spiritualism. At 21, she's already a declared Buddhist, studying ancient languages at the Sorbonne. And then, a few years later, she writes an anarchist essay so radical that no mainstream publisher would even touch it. You can see the pattern, right? She was fiercely, unapologetically independent from the very start.
And here's where her story just gets even wilder. On one hand, she was a celebrated opera singer. She was taking on lead roles in huge productions like Carmen and La Traviata in places like Hanoi and Tunis. But on the other hand, she was this committed radical, a feminist and anarchist writing essays that just completely challenged the foundations of society. These weren't two different people. They were two sides of one absolutely extraordinary woman.
But, her political rebellion was only half the story. Her spiritual quest would take her way beyond just books and theories. It would take her deep into some of the most remote corners of the world for some serious, hands-on practice. So in 1911, she leaves for India. She promises her husband she'll be back in 18 months. Well, she didn't return for 14 years. And a huge turning point came in 1912. She had this unprecedented meeting with the 13th Dalai Lama, and he gave her one piece of advice that changed everything: learn Tibetan. And boy, did she take that to heart. She took that advice and just ran with it. Along with her companion, a young monk named Yongden, who she eventually adopted, she retreated to a freezing, isolated cave over 13,000 feet up in the Himalayas. For years, she just lived as a hermit, meditating, studying, and completely immersing herself in these ancient Buddhist practices. She was a world away from everything she'd ever known.
One of the incredible skills she learned was something called tumo. It's this Tibetan art of generating intense body heat, just using your breath and visualization. I mean, this is some next-level mind-over-matter stuff. The final test for initiates? They'd have to dry ice-cold, wet sheets on their bare skin in the middle of a Himalayan winter. David-Néel actually mastered this, and it would prove to be absolutely critical for her survival later on.
But she didn't stop there. Oh no, she went even deeper into practices that just seemed to defy our understanding of reality. She started experimenting with the creation of a tulpa, basically a phantom being, a thought form that you bring into the physical world purely through intense, concentrated thought.
And according to her own writings, it worked. She managed to create the thought form of a pretty jolly-looking monk. But then the experiment took a really dark turn. The phantom started to become more independent, even visible to other people, but its personality began to warp. It grew lean, sly, and just malevolent. This thing she created became so real and menacing that it took her 6 months of intense mental warfare to finally dissolve it. This whole chilling experience just goes to show she wasn't some casual observer. She was a serious practitioner of Tibet's deepest and, frankly, most dangerous mystical arts. So you take that fierce anarchist will, you add in her deep scholarly knowledge, and you mix in these almost supernatural mystical skills she'd learned. That was the combination that armed her for the ultimate challenge, the forbidden journey to Lhasa. Her survival absolutely depended on having the perfect disguise, so she completely transformed herself. She became a poor, elderly Tibetan pilgrim, traveling with her son, Yongden. She dyed her hair with black ink,
She attached a yak's tail to make it look longer, and every single day she rubbed soot on her face to darken her skin. But beneath the rags of a beggar, she was prepared for anything, hiding a pistol, a compass, and even ransom money. For months, she and Yongden just walked. They covered over 1,000 miles of brutal, unmapped Himalayan terrain in the dead of winter. I mean, just let that sink in. It was an absolutely staggering feat of human endurance.
And the dangers they faced were just relentless. They were constantly dodging bandits and government patrols. They had to battle blizzards, cross these raging, unmapped rivers. At one point, they were so close to starvation that they were forced to boil their own leather boots just to make a soup. But even worse than all that was the constant nagging fear of being discovered.
So after all that hardship, she finally makes it. She's living undetected in the holy city for 2 months, and you will not believe what nearly gave her away. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it wasn't a flaw in her disguise, it was her very Western habit of washing herself in the freezing river every single morning. This habit was so weird to the locals that they got deeply suspicious, and she and Yongden had to flee the city, just as the governor was sending men to investigate the strangely clean beggar.
Reaching Lhasa made her a global celebrity, but her journey was far from over. In a way, her life's real work was just beginning, and that work was to shape how the entire Western world would come to understand Tibet.
Alexandra David-Néel lived to be 100 years old, an incredible life. And in that time, she wrote more than 30 books about her travels, about Eastern philosophy and religions. And these weren't just simple travelogues. They were these profound works that got published on 5 continents, making her a true intellectual powerhouse right up to the very end.
And this is her true legacy. Her books were a complete revelation to people in the West. For the first time, they introduced a whole generation of readers to the deep philosophical and mystical traditions of Tibet. Her writings would go on to directly influence huge figures of the counterculture. People like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and the philosopher Alan Watts. And in doing so, she fundamentally shaped the course of Western spirituality.
While she was in Lhasa, she wrote a letter to her husband, and she said, "I believe that at the present time, among all the white travelers, I know Tibet best." Now that might sound a bit arrogant, but let's be honest. It was a simple statement of fact. A fact that she earned through years of total immersion, deep study, and just unbelievable hardship.
Her life is just this powerful reminder. Yeah, she journeyed to a physical forbidden city, but her entire life was really a quest to enter forbidden realms of knowledge, political, spiritual, mystical, you name it. And her incredible story leaves us with a final question for ourselves. What forbidden city, whether it's real or just metaphorical, would you journey to in search of a deeper truth?